Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother 26 towards the end of week 7, and this season has continued to be pretty interesting for the most part, where we had some pretty interesting results over the past week and interesting gameplay moving forward to where we still do not really have much of a steamroll happening. I feel like the game is still largely up for grabs, but we'll get to that soon enough. Now, I am recording this on Tuesday, September 3rd, and if you're new to the channel, or if you only follow the show through the episodes, I will be heavily discussing the live feeds and spoiling the video results. So if you don't want to be spoiled, here's your chance to click out the video. But with all out of the way, we have 11 people to talk about, and as wasting more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 11, we have the latest boot from the season, and here we have Tucker. And in some ways, I am shocked that Tucker was the boot here, considering it very much felt that he was primed to win the AI Arena comp, especially when we saw what it was before the actual live show where Julia previewed it, where we knew that it was this big puzzle where you're running back and forth. And this very much felt like the type of competition that Tucker would do well at, as he loves puzzles. But yet we saw in the actual show that he just simply misread the instructions and he completely bombed at it to where even Angela was ahead of him by the end of it. Again, very shocking outcome here. But obviously he leaves Tucker on the block, and while there was some uncertainty over whether they would actually pull the trigger, it seemed by the time of the actual vote that the 5 votes were pretty committed to doing so, and sure enough, we do see Tucker going out here pre-jury, which is something that a lot of the casuals didn't like. I mean, the casuals were big Tucker fans, and production clearly loved Tucker as well, to where we heard the following day that production was pretty mad at the players for voting out Tucker, which is pretty funny there. But if we were talking about Tucker more generally, he was obviously pretty good character for the most part. I found him pretty funny with how self-righteous he is and how he was this big presence on the show. But at the same time, I was pretty happy to see him being taken out here, as he was steamrolling a lot of these competitions, and I was getting very worried that if he had stayed in the game much longer and had he continued to win competitions, that he would have been in a similar spot to Tide from BB Can 11 or Jag from last season, where he would just win so many competitions to where people would simply be too scared to target him for fear that he would just win a competition. And why take him out when you can just work with him so that he'll keep you safe when he inevitably wins a competition? So to that end, I was kind of glad that they were able to nip it in the bud, really take him out before he could get too much social capital in the game, especially when that capital came solely from competition wins and people just being too afraid to target him. And mixing that in with the fact that production loved him so much and mixing in like his really cocky attitude, I felt like it would have just been pretty bad for the show if he had gone to win, at least from my perspective. So I am personally glad that he is no longer in the game, and the fact that he went out pre-jury as well means that he won't be eligible for a battle back down the road. I mean, I don't think they were going to do that anyway, but you never know. But still, I feel like Tucker was kind of a mixed bag for me, where I did like him as a character, but also kind of glad that he didn't do too well in the game considering the way he was going about it. But obviously, he is now out of the game to where he is here at number 11. And with that, there are 10 people left in the game to talk about. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely they think they are to win the game based off their current game position. But number 10, we the person who I think is the least likely to win from this point on. And here we have Chemo. And the reason I have Chemo this low is, one, he is Quinn's main target at this point, where at this point, Quinn is pretty intent on breaking up the Chemo, Rubina, T-Core trio. And while Quinn initially had his eyes set on taking out Rubina in particular, he has since shifted his focus to Chemo here, considering he feels more betrayed by Chemo for exposing his power to Tucker a couple weeks back, and also the fact that Chemo is not really that well insulated at this point compared to Rubina, where more people are actively wanting to keep Rubina in the game compared to Chemo here. So that kind of leaves Chemo in a pretty rough spot at this point. And I feel like he probably would go home if he's on the block against Rubina. And even if he's on the block against Joseph on eviction night, I feel like there's definitely votes there to take out Chemo. So I feel like Chemo is definitely in a lot of danger coming into this eviction. And I feel like Chemo himself has done almost nothing to really escape this target, where at the point where Leo wins the veto, he kind of just lays down his sword. Like, he kind of just gives up and admits that he's not going to have the veto used on him. And I feel like he hasn't really done much campaign beyond that to avoid the target off his back. And I feel like at this point, Chemo's in a pretty rough spot, and it wouldn't shock me if he's eventually taken out on Thursday night, even with all the other considerations on the board that we'll get to soon enough. and that's a big reason why I do have Chemo here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have another person currently on the block and someone who is in quite a bit of danger right now, but we do have Joseph. And this week it's been pretty terrible for Joseph here, where he really makes himself a house target by acting overconfident and openly telling people that he's going to beat everyone at the end, which is really insane there. And granted, Joseph was always this way. He was always pretty overconfident, but especially now that Tucker's out of the house and he's been talking with more people, we've really just seen people getting really irritated by Joseph's attitude. And it's a big reason why he's eventually put up, despite Quinn being one of his better case scenarios for an HOH, where Quinn didn't necessarily want to put Joseph up, but kind of felt like he had to. And it is kind of funny how Joseph kind of ends up in the situation here. Now, the crazy thing is, despite all that, he's not entirely screwed, where he obviously has Leah by his side still. Leah is actively fighting to keep him around, and I feel like even if he stays up on the block, he'll definitely have votes to keep him, where you have Leah for one. You have Angela, where despite him actively burning Angela this week by telling her that she essentially can't win the game and that she essentially doesn't deserve to be there, is still someone that could eventually vote to keep him, considering she has a good relationship with Leah, and with Leah having used the veto to save Angela, that could cause Angela to feel like she has to work with Leah there. And then you have Cam and Chelsea, who could also be votes to keep Joseph around. So I feel like Joseph definitely has some outs here coming into this week, despite everything that's gone wrong for him, where I feel like he's played pretty actively bad across this entire week. It's a big reason why he's on the block to begin with. And I feel like with him being pretty overconfident for a lot of it, I feel like he's kind of in a rough spot at this point, where even if he survives this week, I feel like he's one of the smaller jury threats on the board, where people are just so irritated by him and feel like he just doesn't seem aware about what's happening in the game, where he is openly talked about how he'll beat everyone, which is just further annoying people. And it's just a pretty bad look, even if he gets deeper in the game. Though I feel like with the fact that he has an out here with the likes of Leah and potentially Angela and Cam and Chelsea that could vote to keep him around, I feel like those things are just enough to where he's not at the very bottom. Though at the same time, I can't entirely say that he's safe either, and he can still go home depending on how these next couple days go. But for now, I do have him here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have another person who I'm not feeling that great about in terms of actually winning the game, even though they are pretty safe at this point, but we do have Angela. And Angela probably got her worst case scenario here for an HOH, where you had Quinn, who really wanted to target her for a lot of the week, where initially Quinn wanted to target Rabina and put Angela up as a pawn, but then later shifted the target to Angela in a spot to where she probably would have gone home had she stayed up. Except Leah ends up winning the veto, and even though Leah was also pretty hesitant about using the veto, to where there was a chance that she could have not used it on Angela, she eventually does. And again, at this point, Angela should be pretty safe here. And again, depending on how the rest of the week goes, I feel like Angela could be pretty safe for the foreseeable future here, unless she's taken out in a way similar to what Quinn had in mind, where the big reason why he wanted to target Angela, aside from Angela being openly against him, is the fact that she is seen as such a goat that she's just taking up a spot in the final 2, and makes it so that anyone who is nominated alongside her before the final 2 will be taken out. So I feel like that kind of could leave Angela some danger here. And obviously there's the other downside, that even if she does get to the final 2, she doesn't really have a lot of respect here. So again, I feel like my view of Angela hasn't really changed at this point, and you could definitely argue that she should be lower considering she was targeted for being such a goat. But at the end of the day, she still has people by her side. I mean, Leah did actively save her. I guess you can give her credit for that. She also made a pretty decent pitch over why she should be saved for this week. So I think there's definitely some merit here with Angela's game at this point. But obviously, there's still the fact that she's Angela, and the fact that Leah even hesitated to use the veto on her to begin with speaks to how Angela could be seen as an unreliable ally as well. So again, there's still a lot of wonkiness with Angela's game, both in terms of a win equity and even with her longevity in the game. But again, at the end of the day, she is off the block. She is safe for the week, which is why she's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have another player that continues to baffle me in the game, but we actually have Quinn, the current HOH. And I feel like this is another HOH reign that Quinn is playing kind of questionably here, where I feel like you definitely see some of the logic over why he does the things that he does, with him putting up Angela due to Angela being against him and him feeling like Angela is just taking up a spot in the game. and then also seeing the Chemo, T-Core, Rabina trio as a potential threat to him. But at the same time, I feel like he does make the wrong decision here in wanting to break up that trio by putting up Rabina and Chemo here, which is pretty bad on several fronts here. As one, he is breaking up that trio in a spot to where they're still pretty loyal to him and they would still be targeted over Quinn. So I feel like by breaking up that trio, it just paints a bigger target on Quinn's back moving forward while turning the other two people against him. You also have the fact that he is not even going after the most dangerous people within that trio, where he is not only leaving T-Core alone, T-Core, who is much more dangerous to Quinn's gang compared to Rabina and Chemo, but even going so far as to actively include T-Core into the side alliance that doesn't include the other people within that trio, not realizing that he is upsetting T-Core in the process. And we do see T-Core really turning on Quinn after this week. So I feel like Quinn is also mismanaging that aspect to it. And then you also have the fact that, yes, he is on the bottom of the T-Core, Chemo, Rabina trio, and obviously would be in a bad spot if he got to the Final Four with them. But he's also the most capable competitor of those three, to where if he had gotten to the end with them, that he could have easily just won his way to the end regardless. So I feel like the way that Quinn has approached this week is all wrong. And I feel like even beyond that, he's in a spot to where he had to put up Joseph, someone he has a good relationship with, and Joseph is no longer like really wanting to work with Quan that much. And he is still like pretty blind to Leah for the most part, where you have Leah using the veto on Angela, even though he really put in a lot of work to get her to not use the veto there, and still not realizing that Leah doesn't really like him that much. So I feel like the way that Quinn has approached his HOH is pretty bad for the most part. And I feel like he's still probably not going to get his ideal outcome at the end of the day, especially if Joseph goes home by the end of the week. Now, I still think there are going to be bigger targets in the game compared to Quinn, as I feel like he doesn't completely blow up his game, and I feel like there are still people that want to work with him. But I feel like the way he has gone about this HOH is all wrong, and you have people now talking about how they're not going to vote for him if he gets towards the end. So I feel like Quinn is not really doing himself any favors by this HOH, and I feel like he hasn't really built the power structure either, to where even though he has talked about wanting to build this alliance with Cam, Chelsea, Mackenzie, and T-Core, you have T-Core not really wanting to be on board with that, and you also have Cam, Chelsea, and Mackenzie, who are another trio in the game, and I feel like Quinn is just putting himself on the bottom of another trio, except that trio and Cam and Chelsea and Mackenzie, they're much better in competitions compared to T-Core, Rabina, and Chemo. So I feel like Quinn is kind of just thinking his own game as well. But he is still capable in competitions, and I feel like he's still not going to be a major target in the game, at least in the short term, which is why he is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have another person currently on the block, but we do have Rabina. And obviously Rabina is on the block right now. She could technically go home, and it was in a spot to where she was Quinn's initial target coming into the week, where Quinn felt like that by burning Rabina once again by taking out Tucker after he had previously burned her by putting her up on the block during the defig HOH, that Quinn feels like that their relationship is irreparable and that he has to take her out of the game, despite Rabina like being pretty willing to forgive Quinn by the end of it, which is obviously not great that she was put in that position due to a misconception there. Now, I do think she has kind of done good work around that, to where at this point she has forgiven Quinn, and I feel like that relationship has definitely been repaired to a degree. That, and also I feel like she has better relationships compared to the other people on the block, to where I feel like at this point Rabina's probably the safest person on the block right now. Now again, there's still technically a chance that the vote could flip, especially if Joseph wins the AI Arena comp. But I feel like compared to Chemo, I feel like Rabina is definitely more insulated with the rest of the house, and I feel like she has more runway where people are more willing to work with Rabina if she stays over Chemo, who people are not talking about wanting to work with. So I feel like those things are enough to give Rabina the edge here, and I feel like compared to the likes of Angela and Quinn, I feel like she has more prospects in the game moving forward, while not playing as actively bad compared to those two, which is why she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone who has gone up quite a bit compared to last week, but we do have Mackenzie. And I feel like Mackenzie is in a better spot now than where she was before, where I feel like before she was someone who wasn't really being picked up in the game despite people talking about picking her up. But I feel like now, especially now that Tucker's out of the game, I feel like people are starting to pick her up a bit more, where early in the week, we see Quinn actively talking about wanting to work with Mackenzie and pull her into this new alliance. We even see Quinn promising her safety very shortly after he won the HOH there, which is all pretty good. And we also seen Cam and Chelsea also pulling her in. And at this point, it does seem like we have this new trio here of Cam, Chelsea, and Mackenzie that is essentially put Mackenzie in the best spot that she's been in for the entire game, which is all pretty good there. And on top of that, we are starting to hear more about how people are kind of respecting her, where we've heard Tico in particular talking about how she would be pretty open to voting for Mackenzie if they got to the end, which is all pretty good there. And I could see a world where Mackenzie could win some content along the way, build some more respect. And I feel like there's definitely more of a path now for Mackenzie to potentially win the game than there was before. So I feel like those things are a major reason why she has moved up here. Now, at the same time, I still think she could be a big threat down the stretch, especially if we get to like a Final 5 scenario. I could very well see her as being like a JC Lin for BB Can 10, someone who's kind of just taken on the game due to her being seen as this pretty big jury threat. So I'm not saying Mackenzie is the front runner to win by any means, but I feel like compared to before, I feel like Mackenzie is definitely now being included in more things. I feel like people are talking more positively about Mackenzie at this point, and I feel like she is starting to find her footing in the game, which is a big reason why I have her this high at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have someone who I mentioned not too long ago, but we do have Cam, and obviously Cam is kind of in a similar boat to Mackenzie here. Now, I will say that one knock to mention with Cam is he is starting to kind of being in a flirtmance with Mackenzie here, which obviously ties into Mackenzie as well. And it does present a bit of friction within that trio where Chelsea has a crush on Cam, and that could lead to some friction down the road there. But I feel like for the most part, I mean, Cam is still in a somewhat good position for the most part, even though he is still kind of passive at points. I feel like he wasn't really playing the game as much this week compared to last week, though we still see him doing a bit of things, like we see him talking to Rabina about working together, and I feel like that could definitely pay dividends if Rabina stays in the game. So again, he is still doing some things, and I feel like he's definitely now in an interesting spot within the game. But I feel like he is still kind of in this spot to where he'll probably need to win competitions at some point. And I feel like Chelsea is more of a front runner or more active in the game compared to Cam or Mackenzie. That kind of leaves him here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and like Mackenzie, we have someone who has gone up quite a bit compared to last week, but we do have Leah. And Leah is another person who I am a bit surprised by the position she's in at this point. But I feel like now that Tucker's out of the game, and now that we are seeing more of this trio action going on, I feel like that definitely leaves Leah in a bit of an interesting spot here, where we definitely see her winning the veto. And again, despite Quinn winning HOH, someone who you would think would kind of turn against her at this point, considering that Chemo and T-Core have been playing some seeds that Leah doesn't actually like him, and she still doesn't really like him that much. Quinn is still pretty misted by her and still like is very much willing to work with Leah in the game here. And we still see Leah like kind of acting on her own, where she does win the veto here. And granted, she does take a long time to decide to use the veto here, where I feel like it should have been pretty obvious that she should be using the veto on Angela here, which obviously could come back to bite her, considering it did result in Quinn putting up Joseph as her replacement nom, who is one of her other allies. And if Joseph goes home this week, that would be pretty bad for Leah here. But I feel like Leah still earned some respect from this move, where we hear people talking after the veto meeting that they respect Leah for really sticking her neck out and making this bold move to stay Angela in a spot where she didn't have to. So I feel like that's definitely something that could build her social capital down the road. And the fact that despite Quinn and Joseph now clearly not really liking each other anymore, considering Quinn put up Joseph and Joseph was always pretty annoyed by Quinn to begin with, the fact that Leah is essentially able to play the middle of those two and kind of manage them is kind of puts her in a pretty interesting spot at this point. And I feel like there's definitely a world now where Leah could have a path to win, where at this point she could potentially get deeper in the game with the likes of Quinn and Joseph, kind of play these two trios off of each other, and she could find herself in the Final Four like against the likes of Quinn, Joseph, and MJ. And I feel like at that point she'd be pretty guaranteed to get towards the end. And if she gets to the end with like Joseph, she easily wins the game. No, obviously Joseph's still on the block, so we probably shouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves. But I feel like the fact that Leah is now in this spot and has a clear path forward is definitely more than I can say about her than, again, previous weeks of the show, kind of similar to Mackenzie here. And I feel like she's less likely to be targeted in the future compared to Mackenzie, where I think Mackenzie is someone who's already being talked about as his potential jury threat, and someone who you would think would win a lot of cons, and someone you would think people would want to go after. I feel like Leah definitely has this path to kind of slide through the game while still making moves like with the Angela move this week that obviously are big moves, but aren't things that are making a bigger target of herself either. And if anything, are still gaining respect in the game. So I feel like I'm feeling pretty good about Leah at this point, which is why she is here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and you could definitely debate this person being a bit lower here, but I still feel like this person is in a pretty good spot at this point, even though they are technically in a lot of danger of losing a number here, but we do have T-Core. Now obviously Quinn is going after Rubina and Chemo here, obviously two of her closer allies, and she is in a lot of danger of losing one of those numbers here, but the fact that Quinn is not only not targeting her in particular, even though she is the most dangerous person within that trio, but is also actively wanting to bring her in to a new alliance and actively bringing her into the core of that alliance to where he wants to take her deep into the game, really speaks to how strong T-Core's social game has been. And it is really insane that Quinn sees T-Core that way and doesn't really feel the need to go after her all that much, which I think is pretty good there. Now, as we do see T-Core being pretty upset by Quinn's actions during this HOH, and we do see her contemplate blowing a Quinn spot, which obviously would have been bad for her game, but she is able to hold it back just enough there. Now, I think at the end of the day, the fact that she is losing one of her numbers is not ideal, but the fact that she is obviously still in a good position, we've really seen how good of her social game is by the fact that Quinn wants to pull her in. The fact that she's still not really being targeted that much in the house where people are still willing to work with her is all pretty good in T-Core's end, and I feel like she's definitely someone who would definitely have a lot of respect if she got towards the end of the game. Though I will also say that at this point, I am less confident that she'll actually get towards the end, as I feel like she'll probably get towards like the end game and be seen as a big threat to where she will be taken at some point. I feel like I'm less confident now in T-Core actually winning the game, and I feel like she's definitely more likely to be targeted deep in the game compared to Leah. But I feel like with the fact that she is still in a pretty good spot despite her losing one of her numbers, the fact that she's still like someone that people want to take deeper into the game is enough to have her here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 26 at this point is Chelsea. And I feel like right now Chelsea is the pretty blatant frontrunner in my eyes, where I feel like she has really repaired her position in the game, where it is crazy how a couple weeks ago her game completely crumbled when Cedric went home, and then she lost Brooklyn, who was her closest ally, in a spot to where she was on the block that week. But I feel like at this point she has really repaired a lot of her relationships in the house and is kind of back in a good position to where you have Quinn wanting to bring her into his new alliance. You have them building a Final 2 with Quinn. You have her also really picking up Mackenzie at this point, telling that she had wanted to do initially, but obviously dropped the ball there, which kind of led to her downfall a couple weeks ago anyway. But she has really picked it back up to where now she's working with Mackenzie, and we do see Mackenzie being more loyal to the Cam and Chelsea side at this point compared to Quinn, despite Quinn also wanting to work with Mackenzie at this point. So I feel like Chelsea has done pretty good work there. And I feel like at this point, she is pretty safe in the game to where I feel like she's definitely has some longevity there. I also feel like in general, she's probably the best all around player in the house, which I feel like gives me some confidence in her moving forward. Now, obviously, there's still the concern that she'll be targeted at some point. And I also feel like the fact that she is kind of annoyed at Cam and Mackenzie for kind of flirting could also lead to some issues down the road. So I'm not saying Chelsea's a perfect player, and I'm not saying that there isn't a world where Chelsea is seen as this big threat down the road, but it is still really impressive how Chelsea was able to repair her position after being on the bottom for a lot of it. And I feel like with her seeming to be the best all-around player in the house, I feel like I'm more confident in her compared to a lot of the other people, which is why I'm going to leave her here at number 1. And there we go. That'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so looking forward to that. I am planning to start other shows very soon, including Survivor 47 and the new season of Hell's Kitchen, so you can expect content of that. I am on Patreon and have a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.